It was widely considered the first official win for the Tea Party in Congress before last week's vote on a Republican Senate earmark moratorium. The co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots threatened well-funded primary challenges to run against Republican senators who were not on board. In our fourth story, last Tuesday, the Republican senators approved a self-imposed 2-year earmark moratorium. We're finding out now that it only took 3 days for one Republican senator to break the no earmark promise. Let's go backwards first to 2007 when the entire Senate unanimously approved Jim DeMint's language defining an earmark as spending items inserted, quote, primarily at the request of a senator that go to an entity or is targeted to a specific state. Last Friday was Getaway Day on the Hill, with most senators gone. Those who remained voted on and passed the Claims Resolution Act of 2010, a bill that would pay out more than $5 billion in settlements to African-American farmers and to Native Americans who were discriminated against by the federal government. Tucked into that bill were earmarks, 3 of them, 2 requested by Democrats, the other requested by a Republican who 3 days earlier was trumpeting his own vote for the earmark moratorium. Which Republican decided to press his luck, breaking his promise and inviting a potential Tea Party challenger? It's someone in the leadership, currently the Republican minority. No whammies, no whammies! Stop! On Arizona Senator John Kyle and $200 million to settle an Arizona tribe's water rights claim against the government. The Associated Press writing of Kyle's earmark. Typically, Congress authorizes big water projects in policy-setting bills that promise funding in future legislation. Kyle's measure started out that way, but it morphed behind closed doors into a bill that actually provides the money. Smelling hypocrisy here, just a touch of it. Democrats were the first to pounce, but not the last. Vermont Senator Leahy, I do know an earmark when I see it, and this, my friends, is an earmark. He added that the money will help the Apaches, quote, make snow at their ski resort, improve water flow to their casino, and build fish hatcheries to improve local fish production. In addition to issuing a news release touting his support of the earmark moratorium 3 days before requesting this $200 million worth of earmark, on Monday, 3 days after breaking the moratorium, Mr. Kyle doubled down with another press release, reading in part, of course, an earmark ban is not a single solution to our country's fiscal problems, and not all earmarks are wasteful. But if legislators can't muster the will to eliminate a small portion of spending, how will they be able to make the bigger, more difficult decisions? It's the type of question that usually gets asked during a primary. Let's turn to Dave Weigel, Slate political reporter and MSNBC contributor. David, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Senator Kyle declined to comment to the Associated Press on this, but I gather that the Tea Partiers for whom this is such an integral issue are not declining to comment.
Well, no, certainly the Tea Party activists I talked to today read the story, read the AP story, and immediately smelled a rat. Everyone else, though, in the conservative movement was sort of defending Kyle today. Citizens Against Government Waste, which is a group that produces the pig book of all the wackiest earmarks every year, actually said, well, we don't consider this an earmark. This is fine. You saw as a bit of a gap between the conservative establishment, between Republicans, certainly. I mean, Jeff Flake, who's a Tea Party hero, a congressman from Arizona, said this was not an earmark. Saw a gap between them and Tea Partiers who say, wait a minute, we meant no earmarks. What part of that don't you understand?
There were a couple of anti-earmarks groups, and one of them conservative. One of them wasn't, though, that said this may not be an earmark, that there are shades of gray, that maybe to some degree Kyle is right, that the government owed the tribe the money one way or the other. Is there merit to that, or is that way too subtle for what we're talking about?
Well, if you're just going to approach this as an issue the government should work on, which is the way Kyle was doing it, then yeah, this is the kind of thing government should do. I mean, we have actually a very long, proud history of having to hand over money to Native Americans after we've wronged them somehow, and this is one of them. Kyle kind of carried the ball here. The administration, previous administrations actually, this settlement going on for years, put together this deal. Everyone thought it was a good deal. Kyle actually introduced legislation, a Democrat introduced it in the House, to make this happen back in 2009. So, is this better than the average piece of pork? Well, I mean, that's actually an argument some Republicans are starting to have. You remember it was a couple of weeks ago when Michelle Bachmann said that transportation funding shouldn't really be called an earmark because that's not pork. You're seeing a couple of Republicans say, okay, it's very fun to ban earmarks, but when we get down to the serious work of governing, once in a while we have to make an exception. And that's kind of what Democrats have been saying, or everyone else has been saying for a long time.
Well, but surely, and the Bachmann point about transportation projects is important, yeah. and I would guess that Kyle must have thought he wasn't going to get busted on this at least sufficiently to make any dent in him when it comes time for a primary. But will the Tea Party activists see this as the entire earmark thing is pure pandering, or are the Republicans just suddenly surprised that they were taken literally and not, well, 90% of the time or 50% of the time or 30% of the time? Is there genuine surprise here on either end of this equation?
Well, I think both of those things are true. Kyle is up in 2012, so the possibility exists for for a Tea Party activist to give him a challenge. He's always been more popular with conservatives than John McCain was. John McCain survived, but we'll see. If Republicans are surprised, they've got to get used to this because, again, it's really easy to make a blanket promise, a blanket statement of what you stand for, and then watch yourself be called a hypocrite every time you make a compromise 1 inch toward a solution. I mean, actually, this whole thing happens in the context of the Senate passing the big settlement you were talking about. In sites like Big Government, Andrew Breitbart's website, other conservative sites, conservative magazines, Michelle Bachmann again. There are a number of conservatives who are saying they shouldn't pass this settlement at all. There might be fraud in here. Mm-hmm. They haven't come up with evidence for it. This isn't actually the case. But there are conservatives who say we really shouldn't deal with anything that the status quo thinks is normal or that the government has already agreed upon. And every time one of these issues comes up, there's going to be a little bit of fight about it. Now, Kyle is heading into a nice little holiday weekend, and he's going to endure this fine. His staff is not talking about it. But when you make a big promise like this, you're going to have to defend it every single time, and it's going to get tiresome if they don't. It's going to lead to a lot of backpedaling, mm-hmm. which is what we've already seen so far. It's unsustainable, really, if the party is serious about. I keep using the word governing. Maybe that's that's the word that Tea Parties are uncomfortable with.
Yeah, they thought they were going to get governing, and in fact they got sold another bill of goods. Dave Weigel, Slate political reporter, MSNBC contributor. Thanks as always, Dave. Have a happy Thanksgiving to you.
You too. Thank you.
There were airport protests today. There just were not many delays. The roundup, including video of the bikini lady of LAX, ahead.